The energy around the Detroit Lions right now feels different, and not just because of what they've added, but because of what they've lost and what they're clearly preparing to become. This is a franchise that has spent the last few years building one of the most physically dominant identities in football, and now, suddenly, they're standing at a crossroads that could redefine everything about their offensive foundation. The departure of Taylor Decker is not just a roster move, it's a seismic shift. This is a team that built its resurgence on trench dominance, and now there's a glaring hole at one of the most important positions in the sport. When you look across the league, elite teams don't just have good offensive lines, they have continuity. And for Detroit, that continuity has been disrupted at left tackle. That's why, as mock drafts flood in from every direction, the message has become overwhelmingly clear. This team is expected to address that void immediately, aggressively, and decisively. Nearly every projection points toward one reality. The Lions are going offensive tackle in the first round, and they may not have a choice. Names like Spencer Fano have been at the center of that conversation for months. He's a technically refined pass protector with experience in multiple blocking schemes, which is exactly the kind of versatility Detroit covets. But even his evaluation hasn't been straightforward. Questions about his arm length briefly shook his stock, only for new measurements to push him right back into elite territory. That alone tells you how fragile draft narratives can be, and how quickly they can shift based on the smallest details. Then there's Monroe Freeling, a prospect whose rise feels almost inevitable in hindsight. The athleticism jumps off the screen, and once evaluators dove deeper into his tape, the hype followed. But here's where it gets interesting. Detroit hasn't traditionally been a team that gambles on raw upside in the first round. They've preferred ready-made contributors, players who can step in and immediately reinforce their identity. Freeling challenges that philosophy. He represents potential over certainty, and if the Lions take him, it signals a philosophical evolution as much as a roster decision. And then there's Blake Miller, perhaps the most misunderstood name in this entire discussion. The narrative around him doesn't match the reality. He's labeled as older, less athletic, more of a bruiser than a technician. But when you actually break down the numbers and the film, you see a player who combines experience, physicality, and elite testing metrics. This is exactly the kind of player that fits Detroit's DNA, someone who embraces contact and thrives in a system built on physical dominance. Of course, the most polarizing name in this entire class might be Caden Proctor. On one hand, you have a rare physical specimen with massive size and surprising movement skills. On the other, you have inconsistency and whispers about fit, not just on the field, but within a locker room culture that Detroit has carefully constructed. This is where the Lions front office faces one of its toughest decisions. Do you bet on traits, or do you bet on culture? If you've been following this team closely, you already know the answer isn't simple. This is a franchise that has built its identity on accountability, toughness, and cohesion. Every addition has to reinforce that, not just from a talent perspective, but from a mentality standpoint. And then there's Caleb Lamo, a player who might be the most pro-ready pass protector of the group. He offers immediate stability, something this team desperately needs. But there's a catch. His run blocking doesn't yet align with what Detroit demands. And that matters more here than almost anywhere else in the league, because this offense is built on imposing its will in the run game. So the question becomes, what matters more right now? Immediate pass protection or maintaining the identity that got you here? Before we go further, if you're someone who lives and breathes Lions football, now is the time to make your voice heard. Drop a comment with the tackle you want Detroit to draft and why. Because this decision is going to shape the next era of this team, and every perspective adds to the conversation. But here's where things get even more complex. While the offensive line is clearly the priority, it's not the only issue. The defensive edge group is quietly becoming one of the thinnest units on the roster. Outside of Aiden Hutchinson, there's very little certainty. That's why names like Keldrick Falk and Akeem Masitter keep appearing in projections. Falk, in particular, feels like a classic Lions fit. He's big, physical, and more flexible than he gets credit for. He's the kind of player who might not dominate headlines immediately, but could develop into a cornerstone piece opposite Hutchinson. Masitter, on the other hand, represents a higher risk, higher variance option. He flashes real pass rushing ability, but consistency remains a question. And that brings us to the central dilemma facing this front office. Do you address the most urgent need, or do you trust your board and take the best player available? Because if the tackle class gets picked over earlier than expected, Detroit may find itself staring at a defensive prospect who simply grades higher. That's where the philosophy of Brad Holmes becomes critical. This is a general manager who has consistently preached patience and discipline. He doesn't chase needs, he builds rosters. But even the most disciplined approach can be tested when a position becomes this critical. At the same time, the Lions are making quieter moves that reveal just as much about their strategy. The re-signing of Malcolm Rodriguez is a perfect example. On the surface, it's a modest deal. But when you dig into the structure, you see a front office maximizing every possible advantage. By using the 4-year player qualifying contract, they've managed to reward a homegrown player while saving significant cap space. That's not just smart, it's strategic. It's the kind of move that allows you to retain your core while still maintaining flexibility for future extensions. And with players like Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown already secured, and others like Jahmyr Gibbs on the horizon, that flexibility is essential. Then there's the addition of Cade Mays, a move that might not dominate headlines but could have a massive impact. The Lions know that their path back to contention runs through their offensive line. If that unit returns to elite form, everything else becomes easier. The run game thrives, the play action opens up, and Jared Goff operates in a system that maximizes his strengths. And finally, there's the signing of Peyton Turner, a move that perfectly encapsulates Detroit's current approach. This is a low-risk, high-upside gamble on a former first-round talent who hasn't lived up to expectations. Injuries have derailed his career, but the physical tools are still there. And in a system that values size, length, and effort on the edge, he fits the mold. This is not a move that guarantees results, but it's a move that reflects confidence in development, in coaching, and in culture. The Lions believe they can unlock something that others couldn't. As this offseason unfolds, every move, every projection, every decision feels interconnected. The draft isn't just about adding talent. It's about reinforcing an identity that has taken years to build. And right now, that identity is being tested. Because replacing a player like Taylor Decker isn't just about finding another body. It's about maintaining a standard. It's about ensuring that the physical, punishing style of football that defines this team doesn't fade. And as the clock ticks toward draft night, one thing is clear. The Lions are not just filling holes. They are making choices that will define who they are for years to come. If you've made it this far, you already know this is one of the most important off-seasons in franchise history. So don't just watch it unfold. Be part of it. Like the video, subscribe for more deep analysis, and stay locked in as we break down every move that shapes the future of the Detroit Lions.